I will start this new session with a chapter based on the impact of extra financial performances on financial performances, the relationship between finance and environmental and social issues. Okay, let me check for the slide. I am uploading the slide, but during the time of uploading, if you have any question about the assignments, you can ask, of course. And I want to know whether you have chosen already a group and whether you have chosen a paper. As I said, the most important part is to find a good paper. Okay. The file is uploading, but is it okay for everybody? Do you have a paper based on an academic paper related to sustainable finance? Yes, the first step is to find a good paper, and then, of course, you have to comment the paper. Okay. So it is okay for the slide. Okay, but okay, it is not the good one, so I have to make it again. I have to upload another one. Okay. This session today is more methodological. So we will discuss about finance, but I will try to provide some methodological insight, how to measure the impact. And I think it's important for you and useful. Okay, so I am uploading the second document. Okay, I think it's done. So it's about the financial performances. We have seen this already. So I skip the theoretical part. Okay. We can start. So we have seen the theoretical part, and now we'll see the empirical part. And this empirical part, as I said, is mainly methodological. So first, I will give you, as an introduction, I will give you some information about an event, a case study. Okay, I will start with a case study. We have many events which can be interesting to examine. And the idea, the global idea of this literature is to assess the market reaction to ESG news. So we have a lot of events, mainly industrial accident. And I will give you a first example with a very large industrial accident. And we will analyze, we will try to understand how the financial market reacts in the aftermath of an industrial accident. Industrial accidents happen quite often in the world, in every country, in developed country and in emerging country. We have a lot of industrial accidents. And to avoid such dramatic accidents, we have more and more regulation. And one of the regulation which has been put in force, in particular in the US and in Europe, one of the main regulation is to have disclosure about accident, to promote the dissemination of ESG information in order that consumers and investors can assess the firm in order to give incentive for the firm to improve their environmental and social profile. So a lot of different accidents, and we examine the market reaction. The idea is to use the market, and in particular the stock market, as an ally to fight environment. And today it is somewhat common, but in the past, few decades ago, it was not so easy to conciliate finance and environment. And there were a strong antagonism between finance and environment. And the story began about 40 years ago in the US in particular, with some researcher specialized in environmental economics, in particular Robert Stavins, who at that time wrote a report entitled Project 88, and this project was to, as you can see, the goal is to harnessing market forces to protect the environment. So usually there is an antagonism between environment and finance, but the idea is to connect the two, finance and environment. And in this report, the aim is pretty clear. Although conventional regulatory policy have often worked well, they have also tended to pit economics and environmental goals against each other. This goal should complement one another in the long run. So no more antagonism, but something with more complements. Okay. And in the traditional approach in environmental economics, we have this turning point in the literature about 30 years ago. This is a genuine turning point, a change in attitude. If I use the word by Tittenberg. Tittenberg is a very famous environmental economist who has written a very famous textbook about environmental economics. And he said that there were a change in attitude with the recognition that a former adversary, the market, can be turned into a powerful ally. So financial market, the stock market, was an adversary, the bad guy, if you want. And now it is a powerful ally. We will use the stock market to improve our environmental policy. It is a very important turning point. Today, the debate is still ongoing. There is still a debate about the use of stock markets to prevent environmental damage and to support environmental policy. There is still a debate. For instance, Daron Acemoglu, who is from Harvard and who is a very famous economist also, Daron Acemoglu, claims that markets need not stand in our way. On the contrary, they could be a powerful ally. And if you can see, the terminology, the wording is exactly the same than 30, 40 years ago to use the market as a powerful ally. For Joseph Stiglitz, I'm sure you know about Joseph Stiglitz, who is, of course, a very famous economist and who is Nobel laureate. Yes, he received the Nobel Prize in economics, of course. And for Joseph Stiglitz, the situation is a little bit more subtle because, of course, we need the market. We need to use the market to fight, in particular, the climate crisis. But so we need to exploit the benefits of markets. But at the same time, it is very important also to tame the excesses of the market. There is a balance, and for Joseph Stiglitz, the key is to make sure that markets work for people and not the other way around. So the market can be a powerful ally, but if we tame the excesses of the markets, and the financial crisis in 2008 remind us that the stock market can hurt also very much the economy. So we need a balance between the benefit and the drawback of the financial market. So we will see today the place and the role of financial markets, and mainly stock markets, in the framing of environmental policy. And for that, we need to understand the relationship and the reaction, actually, of shareholders to natural environmental events. So we will examine how shareholders react to environmental events. So first, we will see a case study, an example, and then I will give you some references about a qualitative survey, and we will see some quantitative assessment after that. Okay, so the case study. So I will first start with an example. The example is a recent one. I choose an accident in Brazil, in Brumadinho, which is an area in Brazil. And in January 2009, a terrifying mudslide launched at over 70 km/h and carried millions of toxic industrial waste. It was the consequence from the rupture of a dam. Okay, and this accident was a natural disaster for the environment. It was a real disaster, but it was also a human disaster because with this accident, the rupture of the dam killed more than 250 people. So a human disaster with an ecological disaster. Okay. And our aim, our objective is to understand the impact of such disaster, because this disaster is not a natural one. This disaster is has been caused by a firm, a multinational company, a Brazilian company. And we'll discuss about that. So, the accident was caused by a firm named Vals. It's a Brazilian company. So, this company, which is a mining company, used the dam for its activity. And the CEO of the company is named Fabio Schwartzman. And it is very interesting to analyze the disclosure of the CEO after the accident. Fabio Schwartzman said just after the accident, I'm not a mining technician. I follow the technician's advice and you see what happened. It did not work. We are 100% within our and that did not work. So for Fabio Schwartzman, there is no the firm is not guilty at all because they respect 100% of the standards and it did not work. So there is no the firm is not guilty according to the CEO. And the CEO also promises to go beyond the national and international standards. So the question, and you remember the theoretical part that we have discussed already, the question is very clear. The firm decide to fix the standard and they try to fix according to the theories they propose to fix the higher standard than national or international standards. So they propose to go beyond that and it was in line with the famous project 88 that we have discussed. One of the recommendations is to increase environmental protection by providing incentives for business to go beyond what regulator can require. So this is interesting to understand that the environmental policy take a very interesting approach which can be summed up by give incentive for company to go beyond what regulator can require. But it is quite surprising because we can consider that it is not the role of the firm to discuss the level of the standard, but the regulator has to provide higher standard instead of ask the firm to increase the standard. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I have a message because you don't hear me, you don't hear me. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what can I do. You know that sometimes you hear me and sometimes you did not. I'm trying to fix it, but I don't know actually what to do. Is it better now? Okay, sorry. I just interrupt and I come back very quickly. Okay. So it was about the Brumadinho industrial accident. And what I said is that after this accident, the CEO of the company claimed that he is not guilty because he followed the rules and he proposed to go beyond the rule. But the problem is not to go beyond the rule, is to fix higher standard. The environmental policy has to fix higher standard. The main point for us is to, I need to change the slide, but okay, let me see. Now the slide, we have a problem with the slide. Okay, okay, I find the button. So if you look at the CSR report, because Val is a very large company, it is a multinational, so the company has to publish a CSR report. And in this CSR report, you can see that Valls is very proud about its own CSR performance. The Valls, for instance, he comply with the United Nations Global Compact Program. Val has some strong commitments toward the environment. So if you look at the sustainable report, you can think that Val is a very virtuous company. If you see at the CSR report, it is a very nice report, and you can think that the extra financial performance of the company is quite good despite of the accident. So the problem about such a CSR report is greenwashing. Greenwashing. We have discussed about this concept. Greenwashing is when company try to promote a green behavior, a green attitude, but often it is only greenwashing. It is only appearance, and actually the policy of the company is not environmentally friendly most of the time. So now we can look at the stock market reaction. We also need to remember that a similar accident occurred for the same company 2 years before the Brumadinho accident. At that time, there were already some deaths. It was a main accident, less dramatic than Brumadinho, but still a serious accident with about 20 deaths, and it was also an environmental disaster. And the CEO was the same at that time, and he claims that it will never happen again. It was in Mariana, which is located at 100 kilometers away from Brumadinho, and at that time, the CEO claims that such dramatic accident will never happen again. Of course, it was a big mistake because it happens 2 years after. Okay, so the problem with the Brumadinho disaster is that it challenges the concept of CSR. It is a very good point to encourage companies to be more concerned about stakeholders, not only shareholders. It is very good, of course, to provide some incentive for stakeholders' value maximization instead of the shareholder value maximization. But even if it is a good idea, in practice, CSR is too often an instrument of greenwashing. So we have to be very careful when we discuss about CSR. It is unlikely that shareholders are able and willing to act in the interest of the stakeholder. Very unlikely. So the problematic about CSR is that initially, CSR might compensate for the weakness in regulations and control, and CSR will discipline companies. It was the idea by some very important scholar like Paul Lanois or Dasgupta, who have worked for the World Bank 20 years ago. They claim that, in particular in developing countries, CSR might be a complement to increase the environmental policy. And this idea was very appealing. If regulatory bodies cannot control and sanction companies, they should ensure that discipline comes from the markets. If you cannot control and sanction, you can delegate the sanction to the market. It is up to the shareholders, who are supposed to have more influence, more incentive, and more impact. It is up to shareholders to put pressure on company managers to care about environmental and social consequences of their activities. The idea is a good one, but this idea only works if the market sanction is strong enough. The market sanction need to be very strong if you want to delegate the sanction to the market. So it is important to assess the amount of the sanction. What about the stock market response to the Brumadinho dam disaster? The company is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So you know about Wall Street and the New York Stock Exchange. And following the accident, the stock of the company lost 8% in market value. And 3 days after the accident, the loss was 18%. And of course, we can look at the stock price, but we can look also at the volume, and the transaction volume was very large, 7 times higher than usual. And you can try to assess the loss for shareholders. And this loss due to the accident is estimated around 60 billion reals. So it's about 10 billion US dollars. So it is the direct loss for shareholders consecutive to the accident, 10 billion. So there is a loss. So the shareholders have to pay. But is it enough? 10 billion. 10 billion appears to be a very large amount, but it is not so large compared to stock market valuation. Here you can find time series about stock prices, the stock price, and the trading volume. Okay, and the dash line, the vertical dash line here, corresponds to the date of the accident. Okay, at the end of January, we have the dam accident. Okay, and as you can see, the stock price decreases. At that time, the stock price has decreased by a large amount, but then the stock price goes up. So the market is quite volatile, but we do not have a clear negative trend. So we have an immediate sanction here, but after that, it is as usual. And if you look at what happened 6 months after the accident, 6 months after the accident is not a long period, it's only 6 months, one semester. The company has published a financial result with a 7% increase of the total turnover. So what happened? We have an accident, and 6 months after the accident, we have a 7% increase of the total turnover, 10 billion higher than previously. It is quite paradoxal. And actually, the increase was due to a surge in the price of iron. The price of iron increased a lot during this period. And why such an increase? Because of the accident. Because of the accident, the price has increased, and the company take advantage of such an increase to have a higher turnover. So if you look for a period of 6 months, the accident was a good news for the company. It's paradoxical. The accident was a good news for the company, a very bad news for all the people who died, very bad news for the environment and for Brazil, but a good news for the shareholders because of the surge in the price of iron. So, because CSR is related to incentive, the incentive was not the good one here. We have no incentives to avoid the accident because the accident has caused more profit for the shareholder. So I like this example because it shows very clearly the limit of CSR. And you can see that incentive for shareholders and stakeholders are not the same. Very difficult to have a convergence of incentive for shareholders and the other stakeholders. So to sum up, we have a multinational company which comply with the highest standard and committed to be socially responsible. And this company has faced a major accident with more than 250 casualties, and EV pollution. The authorities impose a fine and the shareholder face a loss, but only a temporary loss. After a couple of months, it is business as usual and shareholders take advantage of this accident with an increase in the profitability of the company. So it is maybe not a good idea to entrust financial market with the responsibility of disciplining companies for their environmental performance. The market is not a good tool to discipline companies. Okay. So we will discuss not only an example, we will also discuss more general results. We have some academic articles which provide some general results about the shareholders' reaction to accidents. Okay. We will see the empirical academic papers in few minutes, but before that, we will discuss how the academic research has tackled this issue, this question. I'm not sure you have followed a seminar in environmental economics. But usually, the environmental policy is based on a repeat the environmental policy and this regulatory. Okay. Okay, sorry for the interruption. It was due to the bad connection. So the third question is to the research question is to understand how the environmental policy has changed, how it has moved from a regulatory approach to a market-driven approach. And it is based on the idea that government policy is prone to failures. So if government policy is prone to failures, it's better to have a market-driven perspective. And shareholder, we will discipline firm if the government is not able to do that. Usually the task of the government is to fix the standard, the norm, but if they cannot, you can try to delegate this task to shareholders. We need to have in mind that there's a balance between government failure and market failure. While the environmental economics literature initially was motivated by the concept of market failure, recent approaches have been mainly justified by government failures. Market failures that legitimize environmental protection are quite well known. It is about externalities. We have discussed about that during the first chapter, but we have also several other arguments that explain market failures. It can be due to imperfect or asymmetric information, to public goods, to market control. So these market failures are quite well known. And on the other hand, also government failure, which are well identified, for instance, opportunism and short-termism on the part of elected representatives, the lack of financial or human resources for regulatory authorities, the lobbying, the lack of cooperation between the different countries, and the globalization of the economy and the environment, which can be associated to government failure. So we have failure in both sides. On one hand, market failure. On the other hand, government failure. And we need to have a balance between the two. And the reputation, which is a key asset for a company, so reputation can be used to put pressure on the firm to adopt a good behavior in terms of social issue or in terms of environmental issue. Okay. So the practice, which is called name and shame, is to sanction the firm which do not adopt consistent behavior. Oh, you said that it did not work again. Okay, I'm concerned for the connection, but the connection sounds good. And the headphone also. The naming shame approach can be a good approach, but we need one condition. The information has to be reliable, valid, relevant, timely, transparent, and public. So we need one condition, it's good information. And good information, it's reliable, relevant, transparent, public information. Is it better? Okay. Okay. 10 minutes break. We have seen the theoretical aspect and a first example, and then we will discuss the methodology to assess the empirical behavior, the empirical impact. Okay, so let's take a break to fix the problem with the network, and then we will see the empirical literature.
I was out now.
And the next section of this chapter is about the empirical approach. And we have several papers, of course, papers about finance first, and then paper by specialists in environmental economics, and paper by lawyer also on that issue, and finally paper by specialists in management science. So we have several approach for the assessment of the impact of environmental events on stock market, and I will present briefly each approach. So first, papers which has been published in academic journal devoted to finance issues, and it was mainly about industrial accidents with environmental concern. So we have a lot of accidents in history with environmental concern. I will give you some reference about the main accident, 3 Mile Island, which is a nuclear accident in the US 40 years ago. Bhopal, which is an industrial accident, main one. Chernobyl and Fukushima, which are also nuclear accidents. Exxon Valdez, BP Deepwater Horizon, which are oil spill. So all these accidents are huge accidents: nuclear accident, oil spill, or industrial accident. And we will try to see the impact for the firm. Okay, first. Second, we will discuss the impact of public disclosure. Public disclosure was an initiative initiated for 30 years about now, and it was initiated mainly in the US. We have, for instance, the toxic release inventory, which is a public disclosure for all the companies in the US about their toxic release, and we will try to assess the impact of the list and the publication of the list for the shareholders. Okay, we will see later about CSR events. Okay, I will give you just I will just give you chronology for this accident with the main accidents in this chronology and the main public disclosure initiatives with some references. You can see the references of the main academic paper by Bowen, Salinger, Moutouglou, Lannoy, and Laplante. All these papers are in the references, just to give you a chronological view. So this is a table to summarize the main publication on this issue. We have the main publication and the main academic journal devoted to this question. Okay, as you can see, we have collected and we have referenced a lot of papers, and as you can see, there is a growing number of papers devoted to the impact of environmental events on the shareholder wealth. So an increasing number of papers, and we have grouped this paper by the nature of the event. Okay. 7 déconnecté. Okay. You can find all these figures in the paper I give you in references, which is a global survey of this literature. Okay, and in this literature, we can distinguish between the impact of negative events, and for the moment, we have discussed mainly negative events, but in some cases, you have also some positive events, a positive news published about the action of a company, which is a good news for environment. So we have negative events and positive events. And as you can see, initially the literature was devoted to negative events, but more and more today we have positive events which are also examined. Okay, and I have to do some remark about the methodology. All these papers use the event study methodology, and the event study methodology is a very useful and powerful tool to analyze the impact of an event on stock price. The idea is based on the efficient market theory, the efficient market hypothesis, which has been developed by Eugène Fama, which won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2013. So, if the market is fully efficient when there is a good news, you should observe an increase, an immediate increase. So you cannot see very well here, but just follow the end and the red points. If the market is efficient, and if you have a large number of firms, in this case, the average price for all your sample, consider a sample with a very large number of firms, some firms you can see some increase and some decrease, but in average it is flat. And then when there is good news, there is an increase, an immediate increase, and then if you have a large sample, it will be flat again. It is what we expect if the market is efficient. This is for good news. The representation is symmetric for bad news. But if the market is not fully efficient, you can have some kind of overshooting. For instance, this flat, then there is a good news. So people are very happy and buy a lot of stocks, but too much maybe. So we have a strong increase and then a decrease. Is a phenomenon which is quite, which we can see quite often. It is about overshooting. We have also some insider trading sometimes. So if you have private information which is published before the public information, the market reaction is not an immediate and strong increase, but a progressive increase. This is when you have insider trading. And the last case in red is with learning effect. If the market is not fully efficient, you can have not an immediate increase, but a progressive increase after the publication of the news. And again, the approach is symmetric for bad news. Okay, so the idea is to measure the change in stock prices of the stock price at the moment of the publication of the news. And we are interested in environmental news. And you can see, for example, this paper which has been published about 10 years ago. And this paper was co-authored with a colleague, Mario Lacuna, and has been published in the Journal of Environmental Economics and Management. We have a sample of 62 events. Our sample is about industrial accidents with environmental concern, and as you can see, there is a decrease in the shareholder wealth consecutive to the accident, and the decrease is significant. We have a significant decrease in the short run, and it is about 1%, minus 1% for shareholders. You see the graph here, but you have the table for the cumulative average abnormal return in the table, and it is about minus 1%. So the result is quite clear. Shareholders, the shareholder wealth decrease after an industrial accident, but such a decrease is significant but small. So it is not enough to incentivize the firm to behave for the environment. If you look at all the publications based on event studies, this is a graph which represents all the publications in the red triangle are for industrial accidents. And as you can see, we have different measures, but most of them, not all of them, but most of the results are negative for industrial accidents. As I said, industrial accidents. is marked with a red triangle. But for other kind of environmental news, the impact is not very clear. You do not have a lot of impact consecutive to environmental news. And the second graph is for positive events. We have seen negative events, eco-harmful events, negative events, but you can see also eco-friendly and positive events. And as you can see, for the academic paper, the results vary a lot, but for positive events, we have sometimes some negative results. So it is not so clear to have a global view of this literature because the results vary a lot from one study to another. There is a question. I think there's a question, or maybe it's a mistake. Okay, so as I said, not easy to summarize large literature. So you can use meta-analysis. I'm not sure you know about meta-analysis, but meta-analysis is an approach to summarize the quantitative literature. So we use some techniques, and I will send you some references about the methodology beyond a meta-analysis. But with meta-analysis, you can summarize the main results for a large literature. And as I said before, the impact of environmental news is very low.
Okay. Is it okay now? Yes, okay. I'm very sorry. I don't know why. I change every time. I don't know why. So some detail about the econometrics. It is not the most important part, but of course, because you have followed some seminar about finance, it is interesting to give detail about the econometrics. You know about the CAPM, the CAPM, you know about that. The return for a firm depends on the return of the market. You have a relationship between the return for a firm and the return for the market. Okay? And this relationship is a function of a very important parameter, which is the beta parameter. The beta parameter. Okay? The beta is for the correlation between the firm and the market. Okay? So you can estimate alpha and beta, and with such estimation, you can compute abnormal return. Abnormal return is nothing more than the residual in the CAPM approach. You can define the abnormal return as the residual, the difference between the observed return and the expected return based on your estimation of beta. This equation, if you have any question, don't hesitate. This equation gives you the definition of abnormal return. Abnormal return is the observed return minus the expected return. So you can control for all events which impact the stock market, and abnormal return will be the return consecutive to a specific singular event. Okay? Because you have control for all the factors that can impact the stock market. Okay? So it is a very powerful approach to isolate the impact of an event. When you have abnormal return for one firm, you can compute the average across all your samples, and you can cumulate the return. This is a daily return. This is an average of the daily return, and then lastly, you can have a cumulative average abnormal return. If you look at some technical references like McKinley about financial econometrics, you will have detail about how to compute the test statistics which are associated with daily abnormal return and cumulative daily abnormal return. I will not give more detail about that. It is a little bit technical, but you can find the derivation of the T-stats in financial econometrics textbook. Okay. And it is with such abnormal return that you can measure the impact of environmental events. Okay. I have already shown that. Okay. So we have discussed about industrial accidents, which are extreme events. We have discussed about oil spills, toxic release. You can also examine corporate fraud or a lot of events with the same techniques, but all these events are usually extreme events. And the question now is to examine the impact of less dramatic events. How shareholders react to ordinary events, not extreme events, but ordinary events? Is it important for them? And this question is interesting because CSR is not only to avoid ecological disaster, but according to its proponents, CSR should be embedded in all corporate operations. CSR is a lot of ordinary events, like waste management, for instance, or a lot of very ordinary events. Okay, so in this paper, you have the reference of the paper on the internet, but in this paper, we propose to examine a very, very large sample of events. We have several thousand events concerning 100 firms, and we are trying to assess the stock market response, but also we are trying to assess the drivers of the stock market response. So I will give you some theoretical aspect. First, I will propose you some theoretical hypothesis, and then we will test with the empirical database. We will test the hypothesis. Okay. So the first hypothesis is related to the impact. The first hypothesis is very simple. The question is just to know whether there is an impact or not. Actually, today in the newspaper, you have many mentions of CSR and ESG news. As Portney says, it is virtually impossible to open the business section of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Economist, or any business publication today without the mention of measures being taken by some company to become more socially responsible. You have a lot of events every day in the newspaper. So we have collected all those events, and the first hypothesis we would like to test is whether such events, which are daily events, has an impact at the end. In the financial literature, we consider such events as possible market movers. And they are market movers because they are increasingly popular. They are increasingly popular because CSR is very fashionable. CSR is likely to make good stories for journalists. But on the other hand, the problem is that ESG news are often soft news, and soft news are more difficult to process for investors. So it is fashionable, so it is likely that there is an impact, but at the same time, it is difficult to process. So we don't know at the end whether the impact is strong or not. And the first hypothesis is the following: ESG news have a significant effect on firms' market value, even if it is just small action, small decision for the company. Okay, the second hypothesis now. I call it the carrot or the stick. It is a French citation. If you want to move an animal, you can use a carrot, an incentive, a good incentive, or the stick. The stick is a function, okay, incentive or function. Actually, the debate is about the symmetry or the asymmetry of the impact of ESG news. Historically, initially, investor awareness was about the so-called thin stocks. We have discussed about that. Initially, we are focused on negative events, but today we focus more and more also on positive attitude and positive screens. So the question we ask is whether negative events, negative news impact more firms' market value than positive news in absolute value, of course. The impact of negative news can be higher in absolute value than the impact of positive news. Okay. The third hypothesis is about the source of the news. We can hypothesize that when the news comes from the firm, the impact is lower because, of course, when firm announce some ESG news, we can have doubt about such announcement. Okay. 4. We test whether the impact of ESG news is stronger and stronger because awareness about CSR, about environmental issues is more important today than in the past. So we can expect that because it is fashionable, the impact is stronger today compared to the past. This is the hypothesis number 4. The hypothesis number 5. CSR can be a reservoir of goodwill in time of crisis, or you can observe a boomerang effect in case of disappointment. The idea is very simple. If you are a firm with a good reputation, this reputation can help you when there is a negative event, or maybe not. Maybe, on the contrary, because you have a good reputation, if you have a negative event, the critics will be more severe. So we don't know about that, whether it is good to have a good reputation or not when you have to announce a negative event. So this is hypothesis number 5. Number 6, we have a lot of hypotheses here because we have a very nice database and a very large database. The impact of the distance. When you have an accident for a company, the impact for shareholders is not the same when the event took place near the shareholder or far away from them. So the impact of the distance is very important. There is a paper not about finance, but about yes, it was about finance, but not about ESG issues. And they show that the impact of media on financial markets is influenced by the distance. They look at early announcements in the US, not ESG news, but when the distance increases, the impact is lower. So you can expect a similar there is some content analysis. So what is content analysis? Content analysis is a research technique to assess a text. Okay, so we have a lot of announcements, a lot of news, and we can measure for each article, we can measure the number of words with a specific orientation. For instance, when you have an article about ESG news, you can have a lot of words with an economic sense or a legal sense or a quantitative orientation. And of course, you can measure that. You can measure the number of words which belong to a certain category. So we can hypothesize that when the article contains words about economics, about legal issues, or with a quantitative orientation, we can expect a stronger impact. 8. The impact of negative ESG news is assumed to be higher when the firm is subject to a higher attention. And on the contrary, when there is lower attention, the impact of negative ESG news will be lower. For instance, on Friday, it is very common to observe that on Friday, because Friday is just before the weekend, on Friday, the impact of news is lower. The same during holidays. During holidays, the impact of news is lower. So it can be the same for ESG news, and we have tried to measure that also. And to assess and to test all these hypotheses, we have used a database with a lot of announcements. Such database has been created by a company specialized in ESG information. It was the company Covalence. It is based in Geneva, in Switzerland, and they collect all the information for the main firm. So we can have thousands and thousands of ESG news for a lot of firms. I can show you some example of ESG news. For instance, Coca-Cola gets its water in India from a local village, and there are some protestation about that. This is a negative news for Coca-Cola. Okay. Another example for a very large company, for example, a new water purification project has been developed. So this is a positive news. And this is just some example. We have thousands and thousands of such news, and of course, we test all of them in our econometric model. Based on such news, Covalence has proposed an index of reputation. If you have a lot of good news, the index increases. If you publish a lot of negative news, the index decreases. So you can see, for instance, for a company, I did not show you the name of the company. It is not very important. You can see the reputation here. And in gray, you can have the stock price. And as you can see, it seems that there is a correlation between the stock price in gray and with the ethical or the reputation index. Okay, so we will take the news to test the impact of such news on the stock market. Okay, so this is a summary of the data. We have the source of the news, the company name, the event date, the countries of occurrence for 100 multinational publicly listed firms. Okay, so the first result, we have distinguished between positive and negative news, and we have distinguished news from firm, from the media, or from NGO. And here you have the total. And if you look at the news published by the firm, you can see here that you have much more positive news than negative news, which is very unbalanced, but not surprising because firms try to publish positive news, of course, instead of negative news. And we can expect that the news published by the firm are not very impactful because they are biased. For the media, we have a more balance, the same for NGO, which publish more negative news than positive news. Of course, this is not very surprising. In terms of the nature of news, it is quite balanced between environment, social, or corporate governance topic. Okay. If you look now at the impact, you can see, as I said, and we expected that it was the case, you can see that the impact of news published by firm is almost zero. It is not significant if you consider the impact of the news published by firm. But if you look at the news published by the media, you have a negative impact. So even for ordinary events, even for day events, you have a negative impact on stock prices. Here is the daily impact, and here you have the cumulative impact. And this impact is only for negative news. There is no impact for positive news, and only for the news which has been published by the media. Okay. And then I will not show you all the table. It is quite difficult to read, but I give you the reference of the paper. And this table is to test empirically the previous assumption, the previous hypothesis we have discussed already about the sources of the event, the trend, about the content analysis, about the reputation, and about the distance. And most of the hypotheses we have developed are supported by the empirical analysis. Okay. So it was this part was devoted to event studies. I give you some details about the methodology, and we have seen two main event studies. This one with Mario Laguna, and this one with Aurélien Petit. And again, you have the references and the complete paper. I will send you the complete paper. And it was about event studies. We have also a different approach which consists in assessing the performance of a specific portfolio. And we will discuss this approach now. about the financial performance of portfolio. Actually, you can set apart three subsections. It is the same methodology, but with different data. So you can look at socially responsible index, is the easiest part. You can look also with more detailed database. You can look at socially responsible funds, is the second approach. And the third one is to examine the performance of portfolio, socially responsible portfolio which has been built by a specific researcher for a specific paper. So index, fund, or portfolio. The database are different, but the methodology is the same. So about the stock index, or the stock indices, the first and the most well-known sustainable, socially responsible investment index, the most well-known, has been launched by Kinder, Lindenberg, and Domini. The name of this index, which is quite famous because it is the first one. This index is the KLD index. With the collaboration of Standard & Poor's, they launched the first socially responsible stock market index. The firm, the name of the firm is KLD, and the name of the index is the DSI 400, the Domini Social Index. Okay, sorry for the pronunciation. Okay, it is the first index which has been launched in Europe. We have already discussed about that, but we have the European ASPI index. It was one of the first also. But today we have a lot of responsible indexes by Dow Jones, and the Dow Jones index for sustainable investments is a very large family of indices. We have also Financial Times Stock Exchange, which has launched a family of stock indices, FTSE for Good. It's about SRI stock index. So we have a lot of stock index today. And the idea, of course, is to compare the stock index with a traditional, conventional index, which is not qualified as sustainable investment index, as a sustainable investment index. So how can you measure the performance of index or fund? You know that in your seminar about finance and financial management, I hope you have seen the indicator of performance. Most of the indicator of performance are based on the CAPM or multifactorial model. Here you can see the equation, which is a fundamental equation. And based on this, you can compute the alpha, which is called the Jensen alpha. Okay. It is an indicator of performance, but you can also compute a lot of different indicator of performance, like the Trezor ratio, for instance. Okay, or the Sharpe unknown performance indicator. We will show the results in a few minutes. Okay, so we will try to measure the performance, but we need to have some expectation, some hypothesis to test. If you consider an index or a portfolio which practice exclusion, you remember about the different kind of socially responsible index. Some of them exclude, avoid some stocks or some industry. And do you think such exclusion will lead to higher returns? Not sure at all. It is difficult to imagine that you can improve return with exclusion. The same, you cannot increase or you cannot decrease risk with exclusion. So you do not have a lot of financial benefits. Okay. But on the other hand, you have some drawbacks. If you practice exclusion, in this case, you will have lower diversification. So, a priori, no benefits, but lower diversification. Okay. This is for index or fund or portfolio which practice exclusion. If you practice a best-in-class approach, you can expect higher return. Actually, we don't know. But if you pick some stocks, maybe you can select the good one, and maybe you can have higher returns. It is impossible to say. So actually, a priori, we don't know. We will test this in practice. With the best-in-class approach, in theory at least, you can expect lower risk because you choose the stocks which are the best in their class. So you can choose the stocks with lower risk in terms of related to environmental issues or social issues. Because you do not exclude any industry, you do not avoid any industry, there is no problem of diversification. So you do not have the same drawbacks than before. But the problem in this case is that you have higher management fees a priori, because you have to analyze the firms to be able to choose the best in class. Okay, so it costs a little, and it is likely that management fees will be higher for such responsible funds. So based on this table, you can have some hypothetical results, and now we will try to measure, to assess empirically whether these hypotheses are verified or not. About the diversification, you need to have in mind that the diversification is, of course, the key in modern portfolio theory. Because of diversification, you can eliminate diversifiable risk. Okay, so this is a very important aspect. But the advantage of diversification is very important when you have a low number of stocks. But if you have a very high number of stocks, you cannot eliminate a lot of diversifiable risk by adding one or two firm in your portfolio when you have already thousands of firms. So it is important to have in mind that diversification is, of course, a way to eliminate diversifiable risk, but the advantage is decreasing. The marginal advantage is decreasing. Okay, so it was a discussion about the theoretical or methodological aspect, and then you have a lot of paper about the empirical evidence, and I will give you just some global results. Okay, here you can find the seminal references about the financial performances. Okay, so you have the result. I will not give you more detail about the methodology. It's very classic. It is based on the measure of performance indicator. So what about the results now? The results are in line with what we said. The advantage are very, very small, actually. There is no advantage with socially responsible index. The socially responsible index do not provide higher returns, and they do not provide lower risk. So actually they are very close to traditional portfolio or index. Okay. I give you some references about theoretical model of capital asset pricing. So capital asset pricing with an ESG approach. You have some theoretical references here which are difficult to read. Those papers, those models are very interesting but quite difficult. So I just give you the references if you need it, but it is not a mandatory. Okay, so the global result is that there is no difference. So there is no difference between sustainable responsible investments and traditional investment. Not a lot of difference in terms of financial performance. So the question is not does it pay to be good, but when does it pay to be good? We do not have a difference if we compare socially responsible funds and conventional funds. So we will try to examine and compare between socially responsible funds, not compare to conventional, but compare to other socially responsible funds. Inside the groups of socially responsible funds, we will see which ones are the better. Okay. And we have a very nice approach which has been initiated by Barnett and Salomon. They measure how the type and the intensity of social screening used by socially responsible investment funds affect their performance. We have a similar paper by Renbourg, Horst, and Zhang, which examines the impact of the screening activity. I will show you this approach. Okay. So first, Barnett and Salomon. A very nice paper. So as I said, they don't compare the performance of SRE fund to non-SRE fund. They focus on SRE fund only. And they use a long time period. Of course, the methodology is based on the CAPM. And the results are the following. As the number of social screens used by a necessary phone increase, financial returns decline at first, but then rebound as the number of screens reach a maximum. Okay, so it's like this. We have a curve linear relationship. If you do not have a lot of social screen, you do not have any difference. If you have a lot of social screen, you do not have any difference. But if you are in the middle with some social screen, but not a lot of social screen, if you are in the middle, in this case, you have a negative performance, a lower performance. Okay, so you have to be here or here, but not in the middle. Okay, I try to show you with my finger, but I'm not sure it was clear. I will show you some graphs later. You will see it would be better, maybe. For Renbourg, Horst, and Zhang, they try to use a similar approach, but they only test for a linear relationship, and they show that the number of vertical screen or thin screen or horizontal screen have no impact. They do not find any impact for the number of screens. Okay, and in a paper based on French phone, we have tried to examine a similar issue. So we consider French mutual phones, and the particularity of such phone is that they focus on, they use the best-in-class approach. You can find the reference. So again, some testable hypothesis. The first one is that when you have more screen, it will reduce your performance. More screen translates in lower performance. This is the first hypothesis. But we test also for a curvilinear relationship between the intensity of social screening and the financial performance. The U-shape is a U-shape like this. We test for such curvilinear relationship. We also consider the type of screen. We consider, on the one hand, industrial screen and transversal screen. Industrial screen is when you avoid a specific industry. Transversal screen is when you avoid some firm because of transversal value, like you will exclude stocks issued by firm which do not comply with the labor legislation, for instance. If you do not comply with the labor legislation, I will exclude such firm. In this case, you do not exclude an entire whole industry, but some firm, and we consider that it will have no impact because it will have no impact on your diversification. Okay. We test also for the shareholder activism. We try to see whether funds engaged in shareholder activism have higher risk-adjusted performance or not. And finally, we test for the quality of the screening process. Okay, and we expect a positive relationship between the screening and the quality between the quality of the process and financial performance. Okay, I give you here some information about the market in France, but it is not very important. So our data, we have more than 170 French socially responsible mutual funds at that time, and we consider most of such funds. We have specific data for the fund. We have the performance of the fund, but we have also the characteristic of the socially responsible process. We know about the number of screen, the nature of the screen, and so on. And for each fund, we will consider the Sharpe ratio and the Jensen alpha estimated with the CAPM. Okay, this is some statistics about our sample. Okay. And some statistics about the rating process. So as you can see, we have a rating for the quality of the selection process for each fund. So we have 19% of the funds which are rated very well, and 1/3 of the fund with no ratings. So it is decreasing like that. Okay. So we can measure with this the impact of the quality of the rating on financial performance. Most of the selection process are based on ESG issues. Very few funds focus on environment or social issues or corporate governance issues. Most of them tackle the ESG issues altogether. And the intensity of the screening process, some statistics, about 1/3 of the funds use negative screen. So 2/3 of the funds do not use any specific screen in our sample. And the number, the average number of screens is quite low, between 1 and 3 in average. Most of the screens are thin screens. For instance, they exclude weapons, tobacco, alcohol, gambling, pornography. We have also environmental screen, nuclear, petrochemical, animal testing, livestock, etc., etc. And finally, governance and social screens, human rights, foreign innovation, international labor organization, guidelines, and so on, labor diversity. It's about social screen. And as you can see, because we have discussed about that, but such screens are not specific to an industry, in contrast with the thin screen, which are specific to an industry. So the idea is that such screen will have a stronger impact because it hurts diversification, while this kind of screen do not hurt diversification. Okay, most of the funds do not use any specific screen, and most of them use only 1 or 2 screens. We have only 5 funds with 10 screens, with a lot of screens. So the methodology will be the following. First, in the first step, we measure the risk-adjusted performances based on the CAPM. So we have the risk-adjusted performances, the Sharpe ratio, for instance, for each fund. Okay, and for each fund, we measure the impact of the rating, so the quality of the process, the impact of the screening intensity, and we also consider some control variable for fund characteristic and investment style. So risk-adjusted performance will be driven by the screening intensity, the quality of the screening, and control. Okay, so you can see here the results. As expected, the number of screens cause a decrease in risk-adjusted performance. The coefficient is significant and negative. You can also consider a dummy variable which is equal to 1 when a fund uses exclusion strategy. In this case, it is also not a surprise if you have a dummy variable for exclusion. The dummy variable is significant and negative. Okay. Then, if you distinguish between transversal screen and industrial screen, as I said, transversal screen is not a problem in terms of diversification, while industrial screen is a problem, in theory at least. But you can see that this idea is supported by the data. We have a negative impact for industrial screen, like exclusion of weapons, oil, alcohol, and so on. Okay. So we have several extra tables to be sure that our empirical analysis is rigorous and robust. Okay. So to conclude, we have 3 main papers about the relationship between financial performance of not the relationship, but a table about the financial performance of socially responsible funds. We have 3 papers with different countries, different periods, and a different sample. And for some hypotheses, we have a consensus, but not for all of them. First, the impact of the screening intensity. There is a consensus. The screening intensity reduces financial performance. Okay. Second, about the curve linear relationship, you have a significant curve linear relationship in some paper, but sometimes it is not significant. In particular, in Europe, it seems that it is not very significant. Third, we have some results which suggest that not all screens are the same. Some screens hurt financial performance, while transversal screen do not have any impact. Okay. So it is very important to be careful about the nature of the screen. The impact of shareholder activism. I did not give you a lot of detail about that, but there is no impact in previous empirical studies about shareholder activism. And about the quality of the research, the results are mixed. Sometimes it seems that high quality research is associated with higher financial risk-adjusted performance, but sometimes it is not so. empirical literature about the financial performance of SRE funds. And again, the difference between SRE funds and conventional funds is very, very small. There's almost no difference between them. Okay. From a marketing point of view, of course, many banks argue that responsible funds have higher return. The green is more profitable. Argument is very common, especially when you discuss with practitioners. But be careful, this argument is only used for marketing purpose. Of course, it is very appealing to say that you can doing good and at the same time doing well. So the argument is very appealing. You can make a profit and you can have a positive impact on social and environmental issues. But be careful. Empirically, it seems that it is not the case. The relationship between environment and performance is quite difficult to assess, but in most of the empirical studies, there is no relationship. In event studies, the relationship is most of the time small and negative. And when you consider the performance of socially responsible funds, it is most of the time that the results are not significant. So the main conclusion, and we will discuss about that in the next chapter, instead of focusing on performance, on financial performance, studies should put the emphasis on the financial cost. Investors have to be prepared not to take advantage, but they have to be prepared to pay for socially or environmentally friendly investments. Okay. Recall that social responsibility is not to increase the profit, so it is important to focus not on financial performance, but you will have to focus on extra financial performance, and we will discuss extra financial performance on the next chapter. Okay. Okay, we will show later the problem of altruism. In conclusion, it's not a final conclusion, but Meyer Statman has published some seminal papers about socially responsible funds, and his presentation is quite clear. The aim for investors is to change the world, to have an impact, and the objective is quite different, is just to put the money where the mouth is. Okay, so you can have two different strategies. You might want to change the world, or just to put your money where your mouth is. And actually, if you want to change the world, sustainable finance is not a very powerful tool. It's not a very powerful tool to change the world. But if you want to put your money where your mouth is, it's important to have some sustainable investment fund. Okay, and question. Okay. So two different strategies to have impact or just to have to support your value. You have to choose between the two objectives, but to change the world, to have an impact, cost much more. Also a remark about vice fund. What is a vice fund? We have considered for the moment socially responsible fund, but on the contrary, you can have some vice fund. Vice fund invest in products or services that people find pleasure in regardless of economic conditions. Okay? So in terms of diversification, it is very powerful because when the economic conditions are bad, some products and services are consumed. It's like alcohol, tobacco. Okay. So in terms of diversification, it is very good. And we have some funds like the Vices fund, which seek long-term growth by selecting companies in vice industry. So if you consider socially responsible fund, they exclude thin stocks. On the contrary, vice fund include only thin stocks. Some investors exclude thin stocks and other investors include vice stocks. And you can see the performance of Vicex with alcohol, tobacco, weapons, pornography, and so on. The financial performance is better than compared to the Standard & Poor's, for instance. So most of the time, the financial performance of bad companies is higher than the financial performance of conventional index. So it is quite paradoxical, or it's a cynical approach, but you can see that bad companies have good performances. It's something important to remember. So it's about vice funds. We do not have a lot of vice funds. We have some in the US, maybe one in Europe, but it is not common at all compared to socially responsible investment funds. Okay. We have also some thematic funds, and if you look at the financial performance of thematic funds, like for instance, I choose here one topic about clean energy, you can have some very positive financial performances, but the problem is to know whether this financial performance is the sign of is not the sign of a bubble, actually, because a lot of investors seek to invest in green company. You can have like a green bubble. So in the short run, if you have a green bubble, you can find a positive performance, a positive financial performance in the short run. But in the long run, if it is a bubble, the financial performance will disappear very, very soon. So be careful. Of course, it is very difficult now to say, but in the long term, be careful of the green bubble based on green firms. Okay. Another remark about the cost. Of course, we have measured the financial performance based on traditional performance indicator like the Sharpe ratio, the trainer ratio, but we did not consider the cost of active investing, the management fees. And in general, it is not specific to sustainable finance, but in general, years ago in the Journal of Finance by Kenneth French. Just to mention that Kenneth French is the main co-author of Eugène Fama, which is a Nobel Prize and one of the most influential researchers in financial economics. So Kenneth French has published this paper, and in this paper, he provides some statistics about the cost of active investing, and he shows that in the long run, in the US, because the database is on the US market, you find very strong, a very high cost for active investment, and this cost is so high that the French recommend that investors should switch to a passive market portfolio. And the problem is that the passive market portfolio is not a sustainable portfolio. So the remark here is about the cost of active investing and the management fees, which is usually not added to the analysis, but which can be very important too. Okay. The last remark, I will finish this chapter about financial performance by a remark on resiliency. We have considered for the moment the impact on returns, but what about the impact on volatility? What is the impact on extreme risk? Actually, we have examined the impact on risk-adjusted returns, but now we will focus on volatility and extreme risk. And for that, we will consider a specific period which is interesting for a researcher. We will examine the case of the COVID pandemic. During the COVID pandemic, the stock market was very volatile with a sharp decrease first and then a rebound. So the volatility was very high. So it is like a natural experiment for the researcher to examine whether socially responsible funds outperform in time of crisis. Okay, this is the idea. In the press, in the Financial Times, for instance, in the Wall Street Journal, during the COVID pandemic, some practitioners claimed that because of the pandemic, it is better to have sustainable funds. And the idea of the next slide is to rigorously examine this issue. During the pandemic, because of the pandemic, this pandemic has been for many an eye-opener of the ecological risk. And if you look at the communication during the pandemic, for instance, the statement, the disclosure by Mark Cartney, who is the United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance, Mark Cartney, who is also very influential. According to Mark Cartney, investors have an enormous strategic opportunity to shift toward a sustainable future in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and finally win the peace. So the pandemic, there is a shift toward a sustainable future. So, according to Mark Gartner, it is a turning point. For Larry Fink also is very well known, is the BlackRock chief executive. We are on the edge of a fundamental reshaping of finance. Because of the pandemic, investors pay more attention to sustainable issues. So, if it is true, if such statements are true, we should observe a positive performance for socially responsible investment. And we will see that actually it is not the case. So first, I will show you the drop in stock market price during the pandemic in the first month of the pandemic between February and April, and then in April we have a rebound. Okay. So in green is the stock market, in orange you have the world number of cases of COVID. And just to visualize that the drop was huge in this graph, I compare the dynamic of the US stock market during the COVID pandemic, during the subprime crisis, and during the dot-com crisis. And for each crisis, I consider at time zero the peak of the stock index, the Standard & Poor's 500 index. So time zero is the peak, and as you can see, there is a decrease following the subprime crisis, a decrease following the dot-com crisis, but the crisis during the COVID pandemic was much stronger. Okay, so a good natural example to analyze. We have several academic articles which have examined the impact of sustainable, responsible strategy in time of the COVID-19 crisis. We have several articles, and in this table I summarize the database, the methodology, and the main results of such article. And then I will give you some results. So the idea is always the same. I try to consider some testable assumptions, and then I compare such theoretical assumptions with the empirical results. So I will be very brief on the assumptions. They are very clear, and I will show you the results. The main equation will be the following. We will consider the return of sustainable index, and we try to see the impact, the dynamic of this return, in particular during the COVID crisis. Okay, this variable is for the COVID pandemic, and of course we have several control variables which are very classic. This is the kind of CAPM or multifactorial model. Okay, and this variable about the COVID data is about the number of cases. Okay, and I will not bother you with the table, but you can see a graph which summarizes our results. Actually, in black, you have socially responsible fund, and in red, you have conventional fund. it's not about fund but index, but it's the same. In black, sustainable finance. In red, conventional finance. And we report the mean and the first and the last quantile. I mean the first and the last quantile. And it is very clear that conventional index and socially responsible index are very, very, very close. It is almost impossible to distinguish between conventional index and socially responsible index. So again, there is not a lot of differences between conventional and sustainable finance. Is the main results. Okay. We have also some paper about specific green approach, because in this chapter I have considered socially responsible investment in general, but we have some paper about green firm, and this paper by Lubos, a very recent one, who shows they show that we have a green premium, a premium for green firm. So we have a focus on climate change in this paper compared to the previous paper, which consider ESG in general. So I will be very brief. You have the references about this very recent paper which focus on climate change, and I will give you more detail if you are interested about aging climate. Okay, so you can find the references. I will, of course, send you the main paper also. Okay, this is all for today. I'm sorry for the interruption in the first part. I hope it was okay for you. And the last chapter will be devoted. We have two chapters, but the last session will be devoted to the two chapters: extra financial performances and behavior, and in particular the concept of altruism. So we'll discuss about extra financial performance and altruism tomorrow in the afternoon. Okay. Okay, I think everything is done. Again, if you have any question, do not hesitate to send me email. And okay, no question. So I will see you tomorrow, and I hope I will have a better connection. But see you tomorrow. Bye.